mic check, please.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings.
I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brazier.
My name is John Gordon. I'll be your host.
And I'm your host, Katie Burke.
Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America. We bring the resource to you, the DU Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings. Joining us today from SportDOG Brand, Clay Thompson, the category manager. Clay, welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast.
Thanks for having me on today. It's great to have the opportunity to chat and talk a little dog, talk a little duck hunting.
Heck yeah, always great to have you guys from SportDOG Brand on. Talk about products, talk about hunting, talk about the company itself. But before we do any of that, I want to go ahead and allow you to kind of introduce yourself to our audience. We do that with all of our new guests. Tell us a little bit about, what you do, who you are, where you're from, and what's kind of your waterfowling background.
So, like you said, I'm the category manager. So really what that means is it's my role to be the guy who identifies there's the dog owner who has a problem that needs solved or has a product need. And then I go to the engineers and make sure that what they're building really is what that hunter needs, what he needs to put on his dog to take him out in the field to have that dog safe, under control, get that dog back home to the family. Because let's face it, the dogs are members of our family now. Make sure that they're not just designing stuff that looks good in a laboratory, but it's got to go out in the real world and function the way a hunter really wants it. And so that's my job, to make sure that product gets into the right hands and is what they want.
Oh, that's cool. Now, that'd be exciting because you're taking, my sister's a mechanical engineer, so I'm pretty familiar with, engineering mentality that, you're taking something on paper and in, something that they're building and then putting it into practical use, which sometimes, can run afoul. And, sometimes things don't work the way that, it works great on a pillow in the building room, but when you strap it to a 90-pound yellow lab and it runs into the marsh, it may not work the same way. So that's cool, man. That'd be an exciting job to have. Tell us a little bit about your background and kind of where you came from and what's your waterfowling experience?
Grew up in Oklahoma, and in the early to mid 80s, when I was first starting getting my chance to go out, sit on a dove bucket, run behind some pointers, some English setters, quail hunting, that was really what it was. Is I was pestering my dad from an early age, and I was 6 years old the first time I got to go. I didn't get a gun, but I had to prove that I could keep up and not complain and not be a problem for him in the field. And then it was at 8 was when I got that first time, okay, here's a pocket full of shells, one shell in the gun at a time, and got that first dove, got my first quail a little later that season. And just as my dad says today, he had no clue the monster he was creating. And, it just the passion for it that was going to carry throughout my life. But then as we get into the early 90s, that quail population in Oklahoma just plummeted. I mean, we were plagued with some disease and things that hit, and none of us were willing to stop hunting. So we just switched gears. And I can still remember a guy named Kevin Penwell asked me one day, he said, "Hey, I'm going to go duck hunting this weekend. Would you like to go?" And his dog, Lady, black lab, picks up this just gorgeous Drake widgeon, and watching that bird come into the decoys, watching the dog do her job, I was hooked. And it was like one of these moments that you knew, okay, this is a before and after moment in my life. Before, okay, I was just that guy, but afterwards, I'm going to be a duck hunter. And I asked him to take me again the next morning. And that's really what spurred me, and the rest of the is history. Past 30 years of chasing them from, Saskatchewan to Argentina. I love ducks. It's just, that's really what the passion is. And it's also what moved me to South Dakota. I'm up in the Aberdeen area, and just 1 year, I did not draw a non-resident license. and didn't like it. I'd fallen in love with this part of the world, the hunting, the fishing, just the community that was up here. So I packed up my Black Lab Skeeter and we moved to South Dakota. And that was about 16 years ago. And now it's home. It's where I met my wife, et cetera. So I have a lot of really cool things that have in my life because I was chasing ducks.
Yeah. So we have a pretty regular guest on the show, John Pullman from South Dakota. And even when he's talking about something else, why do I always ask John, just because South Dakota plays such a crucial role in the Mississippi and Central Flyway and parts of the Atlantic as well. I always ask him for a little habitat update. So, with this being pretty quick turnaround on the timing, what's it look like up there?
So we're, at least in our part of the state, as is a lot of it, we're incredibly dry.
Mm-hmm.
So the only good news is when we were at the nesting season, we had a lot of water. There was the grass, and we do have a lot of, natural prairie and CRP up here. I mean, we're a big chunk of the duck factory, this Prairie Coteau region. At that critical time, it was better. But we have just stayed, nastily dry. My yard, I bet I haven't mowed it in 7 weeks, and it doesn't look bad. It's just brown and dead.
Wow.
And so that's tough from a habitat standpoint. And it's also, it's made some of the normal spots I would hunt pretty difficult to hunt because the water's drawn back so far from the cover that, you're just increasing those shots that this is going to be a fall where the layout boat's going to play a role.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to, get innovative and get into those tougher spots because I still like splashing them. Don't get me wrong. They're fun to chase in the field, but they're not called cornfield fowl. They're waterfowl.
That's right.
And I like watching that dog swim after him. So, it's just, we're having to get creative this fall.
Cool. Well, that's very similar. And I talk to John quite often, and that's very similar to his report as well. He was really excited early on throughout the summer. And then he's like, man, it was just windy and hot and everything just kind of dried up. Some of the spots that he really likes to target, some of those real shallow wetlands, just are not there. And so he's kind of in the same boat. Sounds like that, literally same boat as in a layout boat, possibly. So that was a pretty good little habitat report, though. That's awesome. I'm glad we were able to tie that in. Before we get into actual SportDOG products here, I do want to ask you, when did that transition from upland bird dog? Because you kind of mentioned that you grew up with the quail and on that side. Did you have upland dogs
We did.
And then did you make that transition to a Labrador Retriever? And how was that transition?
100% what happened. I had a Brittany really young, and then my dad's law partners, they had some really nice English pointers and English setters that I had the chance to, go hunt over. And after that, early on, I had a lab that was a Sunday paper Labrador. It was, honestly, I found it and had a cousin come with me, go look at them. They were cuter than hell, brought it home. And she was a nice little dog, but, it just really wasn't that much dog. Well, then she ends up going to a buddy of mine. I didn't keep her I had a crazy schedules on the road with work. And so as I come to work for SportDOG, I'm sitting at Chris Aiken, Webfoot Kennels over there in Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of our pro staff members and just a dear friend. We were sitting on the couch, having just watched his dog do these amazing things. Boomer had won the Super Retriever Series and had won the X Games on ESPN. Just this incredible dog who did all this world-class retrieving out in the field and then came home, curled up on the couch, and fell asleep next to me while we were watching TV. And I asked Chris, I said, hey, I didn't realize you could have this horse that could go run the Kentucky Derby, and then you could bring him home and, we can have an 8-year-old birthday party, pony rides. And he's like, yeah. He said, these dogs have got the off switch. And so I said, well, the next time you've got a litter of black dogs, I want a black male, let me know and I'll come back over here. I'd like to pick up a dog. Well, he picked up the phone and called a guy who was bringing in a litter of puppies the next day and says, throw an extra black male in, and looked at me and said, well, if you'll stick around and hunt ducks tomorrow morning, you can take that dog home. And I was like, okay. It was one of those that it wasn't really calling a bluff, but hadn't really prepared for a puppy. It just like seemed like a cool idea. And that dog was, he was a game changer for me. I mean, he had so much drive, was so fun, was so naturally talented, but he was also forgiving of me when I didn't know beans about training a retriever or even running a retriever that had been professionally trained, and all of the mistime corrections, the overcorrections, all the mistakes that I made. Skeeter never held them against me. He just always stayed my, hard charging duck and pheasant hunting buddy, for 13 and a half years. And so that certainly, I never had a relationship or had just the fulfillment from a dog in those early quail hunting years that I have from labs. And I think it's a part of having them in the house. It's part of having just all that extra time with them that, and I know I just offended some guys who bird dogs mean that same thing to them. But when you go back 30 years, the mentality was the dog stayed out in the kennel in the back of the house.
Oh yeah.
Versus today, I think I probably have a half a dozen dog beds and we have 3 dogs. They're just a part of our lives so much differently today. But that's, you can tell that's just what the dogs mean. They absolutely mean the world to us. And Skeeter and that duck hunt was just, again, it was one of those before and after moments that before I had Skeet and then after, just totally different person.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's awesome. I know I certainly relate to that. I've had black labs since I was 14, 15 years old and trained them all myself in a mediocre fashion. I always say it was never their fault. It was always mine. But they were all good dogs and all relatable in a certain sense and all served a purpose that I, needed. But I think everyone in our audience can relate to that, where it's just like, it is such a game changer and they become such a part of your family that, it's part of the process, the whole thing, and I'm kind of getting to the point now with mine. I've spoken on this podcast before. My lab is female. She's 13 and she didn't hunt last year. And she's just due to injuries for the last couple of years, really. She's very limited in what she can do, but it's tough in a sense that it's not that I don't enjoy going duck hunting without her, but you're definitely losing something. It's
not the same.
It's not the same. And so, it's one of those deals where I'm certainly not the guy who's going to make the decision sitting on a couch. Hey, you want that black lab? Yeah, you can take it tomorrow. Sounds like that you were quick to make that decision. I'm a little slower in my process here. Now, my wife would go and get 2 right now if I'd let her, but... But I've got young kids and we're doing Little League and we're doing this. And I'm like, now is not the time. Like there will come a time here soon. So, I'm sure that I know I relate to your story. I'm sure everyone else does. But I think that's also that really gives us a great opportunity to transition where we're both kind of talking about training and the dogs and things like that. And now let's talk about SportDOG Brand. And really kind of the overview of the company itself. And you mentioned a little bit offline, and I think it's something to mention that, SportDOG Brand, along with other companies, is owned by Radio Systems Corp. And I think that's important for our audience to know because you mentioned there's several other brands involved with that as well, which encompass what you can pull together and put together from the SportDOG Brand perspective. Can you kind of just elaborate on that just a little bit?
Absolutely. So PetSafe and Invisible Fence are the 2 of the other brands under which we market, the electronic products. Mm-hmm. Underground fencing, wireless fencing, bark control, remote training, and then, a myriad of other non-electronic toys, travel items. Kurgo is one of our brands. Some really neat products, especially for in the vehicle and taking your dog camping and to the lake. But what it really has done for SportDOG is by being part of such a much bigger organization is we have the innovators, we have the engineers and the resources to really come up with that best product that we can, and then have the manufacturing wherewithal to bring it to market. And there's no way we would have been as successful or delivered as good a product if we didn't have that family of brands and the backing of the big corporate office allowing us to go out and run around fields and marshes with what I always say the cool dogs. I get in trouble for saying that, but they're the cooler dogs. I think really is a huge part of the success SportDOG has had.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I wanted you to elaborate on that, because as we get into some, individual products, and just looking at the whole selection of SportDOG Brand, e-collars, there's a wide range there, and that was kind of the first thing that I wanted to ask you, is how you separate. You've got from the yard trainer to the sport trainer to the wetland hunter to the upland hunter, that's basically your job, from the way I understand it, is to go in and target these specific needs and get them in the hands of the people who know how to use them, and then develop them as products, correct? Can you just kind of tell us how that whole process works? Because I think it's fascinating.
The first place where we start, and our brand promise is to deliver gear the way you design it. And so where we start is by trying to listen to customers, guys that are out there that are hunting with their dogs, guys, that need to train their dog. Because if I'm putting in your hands and I'm putting on your dog what's going to meet your needs, you're going to have a better, more efficient, more enjoyable experience with it. So I think by listening, by using our incredible pro staffers that we have, across the country, some of whom are field trial guys, some of whom are, hunt test, others, they're professional trainers, but they're training the family hunting dog. When we have that kind of resource and we listen to them, and then we make sure that the average hunter, that guy who's passionate out there, and I say average not in a mediocrity way, but just the real guy, the guy who's out there, throwing decoys, every weekend and training his dog, getting him brushed up before the season. If I've met his needs, then I've been successful in my job. And so I think that, again, is one of those where, because we do this, instead of having somebody in my role who doesn't know what a Labrador does, hasn't ever set a decoy spread or run a dog, on a blind, trying to, cheat them downwind to make sure they get in that scent cone. Hopefully, and I believe it's true, all of those things come through in our end product. And from there, it's just making sure that we have the feature sets at the price points that, are suitable for the guys that they want to buy and take a field.
No, that's awesome. And and it's exciting that you get to probably meet with a bunch of these different trainers. I mean, obviously from my standpoint, I know a lot of professional trainers, a lot of amateur trainers, but everyone, not everyone has their own method. There's a lot of them following the same method, but there's just different things that some trainers need, even from amateur trainers to pro trainers, that there's such a broad reach of what the needs are. But I think also what I like about it is sometimes, just the personality of some of these trainers is fun. If I'm doing a piece on a retriever training or whatever, and I've got to call 5 different, trainers, I always look forward to that, because they always have something different, some different perspective or some different thought. And I think, sometimes dog trainers are a little bit different than some other people. And I enjoy that. So I'm sure you get to probably travel around and meet with all these different trainers to ask them about the products.
I do. I've been really fortunate for years, just the guys with whom I've spent the most time. You look at Tom Dokken. He has such an inventor's mind, and, coming up with a deadfall trainer, he's always had some kind of a mad scientist thing he's coming up with that's going to help his training process. You get Charlie Journey, who is a scientist and looks at everything, very clinical and from that science perspective. And then you get a Chris Aiken, who could go on the circuit and be a stand-up comic and probably make more money than he does dog training, because he's hilarious. But they all have those same kind of core things. Here's what I do. Here's how I get this performance out of a dog. And you can't question the success they've had just because of the decades they've produced these amazing animals. It's just been an absolute pleasure to get to sit, in duck blinds and sit in the training fields with those guys. And I know I'm better because of it. And, it helps me with my dog, even though I do send mine away. I will not claim to be the one that's trained mine. They go to school, and I'm very appreciative of the job those guys have done for me.
We'll get back to that real quick on going to school, because that's a good conversation, especially a conversation at my house. And I'd like to get your opinion on that. Well, it sounds like you're going to be on my side of things here, but we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. All right, everybody, we're back, and we have Clay Thompson, the category manager for SportDOG Brand, on the show today, sharing with us some awesome information about, some of the SportDOG Brand products, but also we're kind of talking about his job and what he does, which is super cool. And we've kind of gone through, how he's gotten to meet some of these cool trainers. And coming out of the break, I was thinking, I've got one question for you, though, because you and I have talked, and you've talked about the retriever training and the upland hunter training and the different products that you guys can provide there. But on your website, I was looking at it earlier, and there's the hound hunter. What's your perspective like getting into that? Like your Labradors and uplands and things like that. And then you guys actually have a product that's designed for the hounds, like, raccoon dogs, basically. When you walk into that room, is that a totally different world than, a Labrador trainer?
Yes and no. Yes, what they're getting those dogs to do is totally different. Some of the methodologies and things that they employ are different. But, dog training all comes down to making sure that dog understands what I want from him. That if I am correcting a dog, the dog knows why he's getting a correction and how to not be corrected again. Those are really the same. When you look at a lab that's going to go make that icy water retrieve and come sit back on the stand and have, ice forming on their coat versus that dog with that English pointer we're going to take down to South Texas that's going to run in brutal heat. But then when we go out there and get southeast and you cut loose, I've spent more time around treeing walkers than any of the other breeds to let a dog go. And I'm going to let you go 2, 3, 4 miles that direction. And then I'm going to keep track of where you are, and you're going to tree game and wait for me to get there. There's no way I could ever let my Labrador get that far away. I would be nauseous at the idea of what could occur between here and there. But those guys do it successfully. And I'm telling you, when one of those hounds, when they cut a trail and they all start singing as a pack, it is a magical moment that the few times I've gotten to do it, it was just like, okay, yeah, this is cool. I'm not selling my lab and getting a pack of hounds, but I want to do this again.
Yeah. No, I've done it before, and I've done it several times. I had some buddies growing up that had coon dogs, and man, it was so fun. I had a black lab at the same time, and I was thinking the exact same thing. Like, it's night, and they're just cutting them off the leash and letting them go, and these dogs are running miles. And, you're just kind of sitting waiting around to hear them. And I was totally convinced when I was like 8 years old that that's what I was going to do for the rest of my life. I was going to be a raccoon hunter with dogs because I read Where the Red Fern Grows. And it was like my favorite book growing up. And I was like, I'm going to be a coon hunter. And then I went and did it with this pack of coon dogs. And I was like, man, I don't know if this is a way to make a living. I'm sure you could.
Yeah, but it sure is fun.
Oh, man, it's awesome. Yeah, it is cool. Well, that's just cool to hear, the different approaches there with the wide range of products, which we kind of hint on. But before we move off of, just some of the collars, just from your perspective, knowing that you deal with a ton of amateur trainers, a ton of professional trainers, when you're just sitting at the bar somewhere in South Dakota and a guy's like, hey, man, I'm getting a dog, I'm going to train it myself. What collar would you recommend? Like, where would you start people out in that perspective?
Always start with what breed and what are you going to do with the dog? Mm-hmm. And, I always try to use analogies that if you told me, said, I'll get this Labrador and we're going to do a little field hunting, we're going to hunt some small sloughs and marshes. You don't need my 1 mile, system that can handle 6 dogs. There's a reason why that 425X, our field trainer, is our best-selling product, is because it meets the needs of so many people out there. It's kind of like saying, there's a reason F-150 has been the number one selling truck for however many years. It meets the needs of a lot of people. And so that's why the most people go to that. It's also at a great price point. I like the half mile and the 1 mile trainers strictly because they fit my hand better. And especially on a cold day, wearing some thick gloves, the smaller transmitter, it's not quite there. It has the advantage that on a call lanyard, it doesn't weigh very much. So there's always pros and cons, But I always start there. So what kind of dog and what are we going to do? If it's an upland dog, I always, recommend looking at least a half mile. And people are like, a half mile, I'm never going to let my dog get that far. Or why would I look at the mile system? And it's no, you're likely never going to need the ultimate, full capabilities of that system. But have you ever been upset you had too much horsepower? If you've got the V8, it doesn't mean you're going to pull the max load every time you go out, but it's nice that, you need to pass somebody on a 2-lane highway. I've never really been upset that I had the V8. And that's why, start looking at some of the other systems, even for just a waterfowler. But of course, then there are the guys with the really big ranging bird dogs, the coon dogs we were just discussing, that do need that ultimate, range to reach out there. Whether or not you'd be running multiple dogs. We have some systems that are better suited for that versus, nope, always going to be a one dog guy. Those are some of the different things to take into account.
Yeah, and a lot of and I think one thing for our audience to understand, because we are pretty waterfowl focused and probably I would say a majority kind of retriever focused, really. You guys offer a whole suite of tracking products too that probably kind of, get maybe overlooked by our audience as much as, probably not like the other wide ranging dogs, but you guys offer a wide range of that. Is that, just part of that evolution, like you mentioned with the Radio Systems Core and SportDOG Brand, that just kind of, that's how everything is just kind of moved into?
It is. And the other thing though, the tracking products, so I'll run one of our tracking, a location only system on my lab when we're upland hunting, but it is strictly an insurance policy that if he got away from me, got turned around, because like right now, early season, there's still a lot of standing corn. If he gets out there in that corn on a running rooster and gets disoriented, I've got to be able to go to where he is. I don't run it on him waterfowling, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't do it. The system, they're waterproof. It's just they're going to be our other field trainers, sport hunters are just going to be a little better suited for that duck dog. But absolutely, those other products definitely have a place on the right animal.
And then, just kind of transitioning into that. And we talked before we got on the air here briefly kind of about the in-ground fencing. And I've had Tom Dawkins been on the show before. Chris Aiken's been on the show before. We've touched briefly on some of these products. But you mentioned before we get on that you guys did a little bit of an update on the fence system. I think it was last year. Can you provide some just kind of a background of what the whole fence system is? I mean, just an overview of what someone would be looking for in this product.
Absolutely. So what's great about our fencing system, it's all in-ground wired, is that you can give your dog just exactly the area of your yard you want them to have access, and then you can block off, like if you've got a little garden in the back, you've got a swimming pool, or the landscaping that you spent a lot of time getting it to look nice. You can kind of, this is exclusion zone. This is the zone where you can be, and give that dog some freedom. Especially pre-pandemic when almost all of us were leaving the house and going to an office. I just hated that, putting the dog in the crate, and then something happens, you're a little late coming home from work. I know I need to exercise that dog, get them out. So having that containment system that keeps them from roaming, lets them have that amount of freedom, have some exercise during the day. They're phenomenal. I will say they require training. So it's very similar to like the remote trainers. You can't just bury the wire, put up the flags, kick the dog in the backyard and expect he'll figure it out. But if you'll put the time in, they are tremendous systems for giving your dog some freedom, but not letting them get too far away.
Yeah, no, I know some people that have some, and they are extremely effective. And in saying that, I was just going to share a funny story because it popped into my head. Growing up, the guys that I got started duck hunting with, they had this big yellow lab, and he pretty much lived in their garage, and this was when I was in high school and early high school, maybe middle school, and this dog basically, hung out in the garage and then begged Rice Krispie treats out of us all the time. And he had gotten older and he just kind of lay around. But he was a hard charging duck dog, but they put in one of those early I don't even know what it was, but it was an in-ground fence system because they're like, oh, we'll keep Max. We don't want to have to shut him in the garage every day, whatever. And so we were standing in the driveway, 2 or 3 of us, and Max comes barreling out of the garage. And at this, like I said, he was older. He was already a big dog. He's probably 115 pounds.
Oh, that's a big boy.
Just a huge head on him, huge dog. And he comes barreling down the driveway and runs right past us. And that collar beeped, and it was supposed to beep and warn him before he got shocked. And that collar beeped, and that big hard-headed dog jumped in the air, and you could see him turn his head to the side, and he would grit his teeth and just go through that fence, and it just shock him, and he'd hit the ground almost like rolling, and then he'd get up and just take off across this cornfield. It was hilarious. For some reason, that story just jumped in my head, and I'm sure the systems that you guys have are so much better now, but when you said it actually requires some training, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking Max, like my buddy's dad probably just put the fence in and opened the garage, and here's Max just, barreling through this thing. But sorry, I got off topic there, but I thought that was a pretty funny story. That's the only thing I could think about when you were talking about the fencing system.
Oh, Max just, beating cheeks out of there.
That's right. He was willing to take the beating from the fence if he could get out, I guess. He was just tough. Who knows? But no, man, you guys, along with the e-collars, you talked about this before we got on as well, the fencing, tracking, you guys have a ton of training products too. And that kind of you mentioned some of that stuff not only stems from training world, but also from some of the other companies that are a part of, Radio Systems Core. Let's talk about some of the other training products. You guys got dummies, launchers, different aids, whistles and lanyards that, someone from our audience could go on and check out anything they need. What are some of those products that really jump out to you?
I think that the things that you have to have, in my opinion, is you've got to have, I carry 2 whistles. If one of them freezes up, on those really cold days, I want to have a spare one there so I can get that dog's attention. But then what I love using all spring and summer and early fall is our 2-inch training dummies are just phenomenal retrieving tools. And whether it's we're throwing marks or we're throwing them to get the dog kind of getting back into hunting season shape, or if we're doing some advanced work, we're going to be, hand signaling, sending the dog on a blind. I'll go out there, set up the pile of them, doing our force to a pile, doing some wagon wheel drills. So to me, the dummies are like the must have. They work well on land. They float. So it's, any kind of training scenario you have, that and the whistle. So those are 2 things that to me are non-negotiables.
I think the dummies, for sure, that's something that every trainer out there needs to take a look at. Those are the essentials right there, right off the bat. And before I get you out of here, we had talked briefly, and I had hinted to it, and you had mentioned it before we got online, that your dog, you said you did send your dog away for training, but now you're not. And so just kind of explain that story, because I wanted to get your opinion on how I can convince my wife to send my dog to a trainer.
So for me, I have access to, just such incredible trainers and have those relationships. And I know that when I sent my current dog LS over to Oak Ridge Kennels, Dawkins' place, he went there first for bird and gun introduction, which I think is like a critical step that is so easy to do right and is so hard to fix if you do it wrong. But it's just making sure that dog understands gunfire appropriately and not just, let's shoot over him and see if he's gun shy. There's so much gun shyness that was man-made. So that was a critical thing that I don't have a flight pen full of pigeons. I don't have the ground to do a lot of those things that I need done. And I know he's just going to come back so much better because those trainers, they've seen thousands and thousands of dogs. So I need like a siren and flashing lights to go off for me to realize that, maybe the dog's doing something a little off, whereas they're reading these subtle cues and they're getting ahead of the problems before it really becomes one. And so then he comes home for a couple of months and then went back for the intermediate training where all of the, basic obedience, but also force fetching, steadiness, a lot of those things is what happened in that second time you went to school. So my reason for wanting to send him away is the same reason I've got a CPA that does my taxes. The end result is going to be better. Now, the guy that is willing to put in the time, can he deliver a tremendously well-trained dog? Of course, 100%. I just know that between 3 volleyball games a week and then basketball games and all the other things that we had going, I was just realistic with myself that the dog I was going to get back was going to be a more talented. I was going to better utilize his skills if I had somebody else deliver that. I will also say it was not the fun conversation. I mean, when the girls were like, so how long is he going to be away? And I'm like, oh, this one's for 3 months. And they're like, 3 months. And I'm like, well, but then the dog that I got back, they were like, oh, okay, yeah, we missed him, but yeah, this was worth it. When you could point to his place, that we haven't had place. He'd go and he'd sit when somebody comes to the door instead of mauling them, wanting to be excited when, you have somebody come to the house. That ability to heel, sit, just the little things, but that, my 14-year-old daughter, she can absolutely make him do all of his commands because he knows, okay, with the collar on, he knows that there's going to be a correction if he doesn't do it. So it's not just like that I got my bluff in. He just thinks he has to listen to everybody. And that was the other benefit of sending him away is the number of people that are working with the dog. I think they're just more well-rounded as opposed to the dog will listen to dad, but mom and the kids, the dog ignores them. Those to me are the really biggest benefits of utilizing a professional.
Yeah. And I think I'm sitting here jotting down. I think the first one that you said that I'm going to use is like, that's why I have a CPA that does my taxes. That's going to be the first one with my wife because she's convinced. She's like, oh, if we bring home a puppy, then, I don't want you to send it away. And I'm like, yeah, but it's going to come back better. It's like, this is not I'm going to put my foot down. And then because just like you said, you've got things going on during the week. I trained my first dog, but I was like 16, 17 years old. And the expectation for what that dog was going to do was so low that, I wasn't training it to hunt 1,000-yard long Arkansas rice fields. We were hunting small little potholes in Indiana, and all he had to do was sit down next to me. I shot. He went out and got it and brought it back, and that was it. There was not any real expectation there. Plus, I could spend every waking minute with him. I mean, the dog practically went to school with me sometimes. So, that was something.
That's just it.
Yeah, and so now it's like, I'll be at Little League. I don't think I can train tonight. Something like that. So those are my arguments, and I appreciate you giving me some good tips. And that's a good way for someone to think about it. If there's anyone out there, any of our listeners out there who are thinking about their next step in getting a retriever, this is some very sage advice, I would say, that you've provided. So I appreciate that.
Your wife's going to wonder, is he going to forget about me? It does not occur. Trust me, the dog will absolutely, that bond is not going to be ruined. But I think the other thing is a testament to it is when my dog is back around docking is how excited he is to see Tom.
Yeah.
And so it's not like I didn't send him to boot camp. It's like sending him to summer camp. Well, yeah, I mean, there were rules and there was enforcement, but just reassure her the dog's not going to forget who she is while he's gone away to training.
Awesome. I'm going to approach that conversation tonight, and we may be getting a puppy sometime soon.
Well, congrats on that.
Hey, Clay, this has been fantastic. I appreciate you coming on here, talking about what you do, which sounds awesome. It just sounds super exciting to be able to deal with all these trainers and equipment and product development and things like that. And also just talking about SportDOG Brand and what they bring to the table. I think this has been fantastic.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. We're certainly, huge fans of Ducks Unlimited. Has been, lifelong, going back to having Green Wing memberships back in the day. What a great organization. Thanks for the chance for us to work together.
Awesome. Well, hey, appreciate your personal support there, but also appreciate the support from SportDOG Brand being a, promotional partner, proud partner of Ducks Unlimited for some time. I didn't even look to see exactly how long, but I know it's probably been, at least a decade there. But man, we really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I'd like to thank my guest, Clay Thompson, the category manager for SportDOG Brand, for coming on the show and really running us through everything about SportDOG Brand products and even giving us some helpful advice on convincing my wife to allow me to send the dog to a trainer. I'd like to thank our producer, Chris Isaac, for putting the show together and getting it out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks. Stay tuned to the Ducks.